John, welcome to MedTech Unboxed.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. It's just an honor to be here.
Great. I'm looking forward to our conversation, not only about the tech platform that you're going to share, but kind of your story and how you got here and you, how you're trying to solve this unmet need with pulmonary embolisms. It's a huge problem. I think it's like 100,000 people die a year, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
due to pulmonary embolism. So
Uh-huh.
hopefully there's some vision how we could solve that, that gap in the healthcare system.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, Steve, and maybe tragic in some ways, but sometimes when I'm pitching to various investor groups or whatever, I tell them, okay, it's going to get really sad here for a few minutes, but then I promise you, I'm okay. Everything is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
know. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say my path to this position in front of you today has been quite emotional, and deeply personal to me. And so, I think we spoke about it before, but I lost my mother when I was 3 to a massive pulmonary embolism when my little sister was born, and so she had a cesarean section. And oh, by the way, pregnancy related mortality. This is one of the leading causes of pregnancy related mortality to this day, even. And about 4 hours after the birth of my sister, she was in the ICU. And keep in mind, this is in the 70s, early 70s. And I think by the time they figured out what had actually happened or what was going on, she just didn't survive the trip from the ICU to the OR, where at that point in time, they would have cracked her chest open. They would have pulled the blood clots out, surgical embolectomy, essentially, to basically heal the vessels and give her a chance. And so, that's the story on my mom's side. And then what tragically, just a few short years after that, my father passed from leukemia.
Hmm.
And I think, the reason I tell you that story is it kind of has direct relation to what we're doing here at Liquet, in the sense that, when we used to treat cancer back in the day, again, the 70s, we used to just throw the kitchen sink at these patients and just hope for the best. And for some people that worked out okay. We'd flood their bodies with radiation chemotherapy. But for some people, we would undertreat them and the cancer would go on to kill them. And so for others, like my father, it's just too much for his body, couldn't take it.
Yeah.
And that experience was like, well, geez, if we had tools like we have today, survival rates for leukemia that he had, hairy cell leukemia, survival rates are 90+% now. But if we can personalize the treatment to the individual rather than, the cancer, then we do much, much better. And so and we've kind of seen this before in the past, other areas in medicine where we personalize the medication to the individual, it always plays out better. And so that's kind of what we're building here.
Okay.
At Liquet.
That personal side, it can be kind of emotional. I was in a meeting this week. I told you I was in the Bay Area, and I was meeting with a brilliant developer of medical devices in the surgical robotic field. And my counterpart asked him, "Hey, how did you get into this?" And it's like, you never know when you ask a question like that. And he had a very emotional response about a family member in his life and how, he was a middle-class guy growing up, and his father was a mechanic, his mother was a stay-at-home. It's like, we didn't have access, and here my sibling had this problem. So it's like, at that point, I knew that's what I wanted to do, to help save people's lives, like a situation, make better outcomes, like a situation like that. So I appreciate you sharing that personal side to kind of why you got into this field. And it can be kind of personal, but it's real, right?
Yeah, and I think, after graduating, like I studied economics in college, right? And so I was, I think at that point in time, I think I really wanted to go in and get my JD and do something, maybe fiscal policy related. But then I started thinking about, all these experience I had growing up, and I had a cousin who was in the med device field, and I was really enamored with what he had done with his career. And then I started thinking more deeply about, well, what actually happened to my parents? And so that kind of led to this journey where, I'm going to go into med device. I'll start off as a sales guy, but my whole career in vascular space, just really at the first part of it, just really trying to understand, these bloodborne diseases, vascular disease, et cetera. Anyway, so I've been very fortunate along the way. Um,
Tell us a little bit about that kind of that you had like this 25-year apprenticeship program that got you to where you are
yeah,
today, and you kind of were part of a family business, or not a family, but family business, but you were part of a family at a company, Atrium,
yeah.
and the next thing you know, you're big part of a bigger, more corporate in a different culture. Kind of share that with us.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to hear that, John.
Well, I think, Atrium, I can't say enough great things about Atrium. Like the family that we had at Atrium was amazing. Family owned business, the culture itself there was really dynamic. Um, and here I would say that was gave me a holistic opportunity to really kind of understand many facets of the business. Started off as a sales guy there, and then actually as a sales guy, I prematurely retired, and my wife and I took a trip around the world on our bikes for about 4 years. But I'll relate that back to Atrium.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
says a lot about the culture at Atrium in the sense that when I came back from that trip or that hiatus, they welcomed me with open arms and gave me an opportunity to get back into the business. But yeah, quite a journey, Steve. Maybe we could talk about that for a few minutes a little bit later, but
yeah.
I'm sure that's piqued some people's interest.
Well,
But go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. What piqued my interest? You said, a 4-year bike ride around the world. Just kind of tap into that a little bit because that's very interesting.
Yeah. I'm fortunate enough to be married to just a really wonderful lady who's she's a Canadian from Western Canada, born and raised in Edmonton. And when I proposed to her, we met each other in Cincinnati, Ohio. When I proposed to her, she said, "Hey, I want you to read this book. It's called Miles from Nowhere by Barbara and Larry Savage, these California couple that had ridden their bikes a couple years on the road in the 70s." And she said, "I read this when I was high school. If you're not down with this, we probably should get married."
The litmus test.
And I thought this woman is nuts. There is no way I'm going to do this. But we got married, and then 3 years later, we took anything worth of any value and packed it in my buddy's basement and took off. But we were literally, we weren't religious about riding every inch of these countries, but we cycled 50 some odd countries,
Mhm.
4 years. We kind of let the seasons push us around. But Steve, it was a really amazing, eye-opening experience to me. First of all, what little it takes to survive and be happy, but I mean, it took us about a year to kind of get away from our corporate lives where we settled down enough where we could just enjoy the day as it unfolded in front of us, right?
Yeah.
But what a journey. So many near-death experiences and all kinds of crazy stories.
I mean, this thing you're talking about what people are doing these days, right? I mean, this is what everybody's on, and you're out talking, 4 years on a bike and have near death experiences. That's amazing.
And the funny thing is, Steve, all of that trip was without this
Yeah.
before it was even invented. And so we navigated with maps and guidebooks, like the Lonely Planet guidebook. You ever heard of that?
What a concept.
Yeah, just ripping out pages as we went along, right?
Yeah.
Just to
Wow.
make the load lighter. Yeah, I'll tell you, compass on my wrist, and what a mess. I
Wow.
mean, that trip would be so different now with a video like
Yeah.
this in your pocket and computer, and geez.
It'd all be on YouTube. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Let's transition now. Thanks for that history and background and that amazing journey that you
Yeah.
took.
Yeah.
That, that says a lot about you, John, actually, you and your wife, right? Yeah.
Yes. I think maybe that entrepreneurial spirit, right? I'm not afraid of risk.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And I think you have to be somewhat on the crazy side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Recognize that about yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's get into the, fast forward in the two 2020s, and, you
Yeah.
kind of back at it. And,
Yeah.
um, the relationship you had with Dr. Ken Rosenfield and Dr. Kelly, and this kind of walk us through this Verisys catheter
Sure.
concept,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I
origins
think I
of it.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, no worries. Listen, I was going to say this earlier, but very fortunate to be a part of Atrium's family, right? And around a lot of people that mentored and really cared about me and my professional development. And so, came back as a sales guy, did a business development stint for a long time, then was spent a good chunk of my career in training, actually. My father was a teacher, and I think that kind of resonates with me a bit. But I also think that's a really noble thing to do for a med device company. Sales is literally the lifeblood of the company. And so um, I think that's very important. But then from there, I had a wonderful opportunity to get into the M&A side of the business and think about, strategically what I could do for a larger corporation, just in terms of looking after, what interesting emerging technologies are out there. That kind of gave me this idea, hey, I could do this on my own.
Mhm.
Long story short, we started off originally, Liquet Medical started off originally on a different idea. And we were looking to pull some IP back from a larger corporate that had sunset that platform. We were going to breathe life back into it, et cetera. There wasn't a whole lot of IP left on the platform. And so as we were going through the diligence process, I came across Dr. Kelly, you just mentioned,
Mhm.
just a wonderful, passionate, caring individual he's actually a mechanical engineer by background. So he's building bridges before he actually became a physician, doctor. So I'll give you a little insight on the way his brain works.
Yeah.
But he's got more than 200 patents to his name, I believe, at this point now in his career. I don't quote me on that, but it's got to be close.
Yeah.
But just a prolific inventor. And he said, "Hey, John, if you really want to build a company, why don't you look at some of the stuff I've got?" And so we did. And this specific platform for PE really kind of piqued my interest, not just because it was personal to me and I had this experience and this collective knowledge in the vascular space, but I really felt like, hey, this is an opportunity. Of course, you can't just run with something because you're emotional about it. And so you put this thing through its test. Are you familiar with the Mom Test book? Are you familiar with that book?
No.
I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name who actually wrote that book. It'll come to me here in a minute, but the general context behind the mom test is, hey, most people are going to tell you, just like your mom would, that your idea is great. And so you have to figure out from the discovery phase how to engineer the questions in such a way that you really get at the pain point and understand whether or not you've got a technology that would have some runway, and do well, right? Because everybody's going to tell you, if you don't set it up right, everybody's going to tell you, oh yeah, they're going to tell you what you want to hear, right?
Right.
And so I think that's super important. So at any rate, we kind of, over the years, we've kind of thought about device innovation, kind of like meeting 5 different goals. It's got to be cost effective. It's got to have strong IP protection because that's the value of the device and the innovation itself. But it has to be easy to use, right? I mean, doctors, they just want to adopt it if it's not easy on them to use. But it also has to have strong reimbursement. And then the IP has to be differentiated too, not just from a catheter perspective, like features and benefits, but what does it bring to the table clinically, right? That's differentiated. And so I feel like we checked all those boxes and decided that this was a platform we wanted to invest our own money in to bring forward. And so the device, you want to take a look at the device?
Yes, please.
This is what we call the Versus catheter. And so it has a color coding system to it because we have 2 basic predicates for this device. One is the Swan-Ganz catheter,
Okay.
which allows us to let a clinician place this at the bedside if they wanted to. I'll put the little balloon up similar to a Swan-Ganz.
Yep.
So that comes in through the sheath, either in the groin, the arm, or the neck. And then the operator can just push. And they can do this under Flura, they can do it under X-ray guidance, or they can do it without. And that will navigate up through the heart and into the pulmonary arteries. It doesn't really matter whether it goes left or right side. It's going to go path of least resistance. That's what our animal models have shown. But once it's in place, we can deliver a bolus at TPA. We can settle down, the pressure that's on the right side of the heart and at least, stabilize that patient. So when you think about my mom as an example, right?
Yep.
This would be a device that would have helped those physicians buy a little bit of time.
Right.
And so we're hoping that this is something that can bring some utility for physicians here in the future. The other aspects about this catheter, Steve, is it's a telescoping catheter. And so what we're trying to do here is give the operator a chance to treat both lungs with the same device. And so there's a nice,
Mm.
cost benefit to that from the hospital's perspective. But then the big game changer for us, Steve, is we capture the patient's PA pressure right here at the bifurcation. And we have strong IP around how we do that. And so, as we're trying to protect the environment here, but the first rendition, we're just trying to keep it very simple. We don't want the hospital to have to buy an additional piece of equipment. This all interfaces with the monitor right at the patient's bedside. Again, we're going for simplicity. We want to give the physicians a device that's intuitive, easy to use. They can use it in a rural hospital, a community hospital, as well as a large tertiary care facility. And so that's the tact for this right now.
So that's a dual tip, single access.
Correct. And the game changer is the PA pressure, right?
Mhm.
So it's super important. Now, the way these patients die is too much pressure builds up in their chest, and over time, that puts a lot of pressure on their heart.
Yeah.
And eventually, the heart just gives out, can't pump the blood, and they'll die from cardiac arrest. And so, what if we could listen to the lungs while we're treated and understand and get that real time feedback? Hey, we're watching that PA pressure decrease, and once it stabilizes, what is that X period of time where we're comfortable? But we give the physicians that flexibility. They can switch it over to hep saline and just relax. Let's just make sure the patient's responded well to the therapy. And then we can make a more informed decision to pull the catheter out at some point in the future.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you kind of give us, are you at an inflection point now with clinicals or preclinicals? Where are you at in that regard?
Yeah. So we've got this device I'm sharing with you here, we affectionately call our interventional cardiology device.
Okay.
It's on an 8 French platform. And, one side is an 035 wire, the other side's an 014 wire. And so it has the balloon on it, something that they're more familiar with from a PA perspective, and doing right arm caths. And so we have another version of this product without the balloon, and it's on a slightly larger platform that's probably better suited for interventional radiology and maybe even vascular surgery. I'd go as far as to say. But those are the 3 primary specialties that are treating these patients. And so once we get that second platform through the FDA and cleared, then we will put both of these into an IDE study for an expanded indication for pulmonary embolism.
Okay.
And that's really when we start thinking about, a broader commercial launch,
Yeah.
or maybe even a strategic exit, depending on the timing and how things are working out.
Right. Okay. Wow. Exciting.
Yes.
The next couple of years, 12 to 24 months will be very exciting for you and pivotal.
I
Literally.
think so. Steve, I think this is the perfect timing, really, right? Pulmonary embolism is such a hot space right now. We're all familiar with what happened with Liquet Medical and that great, exit that they went through.
Yes.
To Stryker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Inari has done some wonderful things, right? They've saved lots of patients' lives, very, very sick patients, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just wonderful to have that technology in the armamentarium. And so I think, what we're really excited about is the new randomized controlled data that's shortly to come out. One of them actually just reported out here recently. And it was an opportunity for us to kind of get an idea of what's going on, the way the doctors are thinking about things. But it's really what we're doing now is we're comparing oral anticoagulants to either catheter-directed thrombolytics like this or mechanical thrombectomy. And what we're trying to do, Steve, is we're trying to figure out, well, at what stage in the patient's acuity would each one of these types of technology be best for them? And so The controversial area really is in this intermediate high risk to intermediate low risk patients. And how are we thinking about them, especially those normotensive patients? And so, do they rise to the level, the acuteness level where we want to use mechanical thrombectomy and think about a larger bore
Mhm.
system? Or should they be better off treated with a CDT or maybe even oral anticoagulants? And I think that's what some of these RCTs are going to tell us.
What are you're talking about this intermediate risk, right? And if you had to guess, 2030 timeframe, what percentage of people do you think could be impacted by this catheter-based therapy?
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, I think, very telling to me, I was at the PERT meeting this last month. Just
Mhm.
this is the Pulmonary Embolism Response Team. This is an organization that Dr. Kenny Rosenfield and some of his colleagues put together at Boston, Massachusetts, and they're just doing great things for this facility. If you're not familiar, it's basically a multidisciplinary approach, the way we used to think about STEMI in many ways,
Yeah.
where patient presents with suspected PE, and we pull this mind share together to make some intelligent decisions about, well, how are we going to approach this patient versus that patient? And so this is just a really helpful new thing in this environment. I guess it's been around more than 10 years now, but relatively new in this space. And so I think here's an opportunity for us to understand, you know, that as these studies are coming out, just from that PERT meeting a couple weeks ago, I was just amazed to hear that some of the leading thought leaders here believe that we're probably only treating about 14% of the patients that could potentially benefit from this therapy. And so if you think about it that way, I know these are all comers we're talking about,
Right.
but even without all comers and just the segment of patients that we think we could treat, we're still probably only at 28 or maybe even 30% of those. And so I think the vast majority of physicians, and rightly so, are using a conservative approach. And maybe we see more of that in the rural and community hospital settings than we see in the larger tertiary care facilities. But
Mhm.
let's take an oral anticoagulant, let's watch and wait and make sure, monitor these patients. Would I think maybe some of these patients, a lot of these patients could probably benefit from interventional therapy. And that's speaking to those RCTs that are coming out.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get a lot of clarity there. And so I do think that there's quite a big opportunity for all the companies in this space that are trying to develop in this area.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna be keeping tabs on this for sure, John. It's gonna be an exciting couple of years, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate you sharing your kind of background and the story and how you got there and the tech platform. And really, like again, real excited to follow it.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. I think we've got some great partners at the table with
Mhm.
us right now. And it's just such an exciting time right now as we head into our next indication and we start thinking about, well, what does the IDE trial look like? What kind of endpoints can we put into the IDE trial to help push the science in this direction too? And so just a really exciting time for us.
Excellent. All right.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks again, John. This has been great, and appreciate you coming on MedTech Unboxed to share the story and the tech platform. And we're really excited about it.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate you having me, and it's just been a pleasure, knowing the other guests you've had on your show, and I just feel fortunate to be in their company. So, thank you.
Absolutely.